There is a war that does not announce itself with drums or fire or the visible clash of armies. It moves in silence, through doctrine, through whispered theology, through the slow erosion of identity that happens so gradually you barely notice until the morning you wake up and do not recognize the spiritual authority that was always supposed to be yours. This war is not about land. It is not about religious affiliation or denominational allegiance. It is about covenant identity, and the enemy understands with terrifying precision that if he can strip you of your grafted position before you ever understand what that position means, he can neutralize a weapon he has feared since before your name was written in the registry of chosen souls. The battle you are living inside right now, the confusion, the spiritual fatigue, the sense that you are always fighting but never quite gaining ground, is not random. It is targeted. You are being attacked at the root of your identity because the enemy has done a full intelligence assessment, and he knows exactly what you are capable of when you operate from the fullness of your covenant inheritance. That is why the fog is so thick around this particular truth. That is why replacement theology has been allowed to circulate for centuries without serious challenge. The enemy does not invest in jamming a dead signal. He jams the one that is alive, broadcasting, and threatening to wake up every sleeping branch on the tree. Your awakening is his emergency. Your understanding is his unraveling. And this, right here, right now, is where you start to understand what they never told you. You have felt it in your body before your mind could translate it. A heaviness that descends without warning, a pressure behind the sternum that feels like grief but is not yours, an exhaustion so bone deep that 8 hours of sleep does nothing to dissolve it. That is not depression. That is the physical sensation of a spiritual severance operation running in the background of your life. When the enemy deploys replacement theology against you, it does not always come through a sermon or a textbook. It comes through the accumulation of small theological assumptions that embed themselves in your spiritual nervous system over years of passive reception. You sit in services that never connect the new covenant to its Abrahamic root. You read devotionals that treat the Hebrew scriptures as prologue rather than foundation. You sing worship songs stripped of their covenant context. And slowly, without you ever agreeing to it consciously, you begin to operate as an orphan. You pray with the faith of someone hoping to be heard rather than the authority of someone who belongs to the household. You intercede as a guest rather than as a grafted heir. The intrusive thought that surfaces during these moments is subtle and devastating. Maybe I am not really chosen. Maybe this is not really for me. Maybe I misunderstood my position in all of this. That thought is not your thought. That is the enemy's voice wearing the costume of your own insecurity. And the spiritual action the enemy is executing through that thought is a severance attempt. He is trying to make you agree to your own disconnection. He is trying to get your vocal agreement to orphan theology because he knows that what you declare in the Spirit carries weight. And a believer who declares themselves outside the covenant is a believer who has just handed the enemy a legal document. Do not sign it. You were not brought this far to be abandoned at the gate. You were not grafted in just to be cut off again by a doctrine that was designed in a spiritual boardroom of darkness to accomplish exactly that severance. You won't defeat this attack alone. Breaking these emotional and spiritual hexes requires a higher code, which is exactly why I just released the 3 Keys to a Prosperous Life trilogy, whose unlocking link is in the pinned comment. Access it before the fog blinds you again, before the next wave of exhaustion makes you forget what you are and who you belong to. Because the enemy's most effective weapon is not a frontal assault, it is the slow accumulation of theological fog that makes you question your own standing until you voluntarily step down from the seat that was built for you. The dream comes for you at 3 in the morning. You are running, but your legs are stone. The ground beneath your feet is familiar, a place you recognize from waking life. But in this dream, it has become hostile terrain. And no matter how hard you push, no matter how desperately your will presses against the immovability of your own limbs, you cannot gain ground. Something is behind you. You cannot see it clearly, but you feel its attention, its calculation, its patience. It is not chasing you in panic. It is herding you. It knows exactly where you are going because it has studied your patterns longer than you have been studying yourself. The physical sensation upon waking is the residue of spiritual battle conducted in the realm you visit when your conscious defenses are offline. Your chest is tight. Your body is exhausted in ways that the night should have healed. Your first conscious thought is a variant of dread, a low-frequency anxiety that has no identifiable object in the waking world, but presses against you with the weight of something real and present. This is the dream of persecution, and it is one of the clearest diagnostic signs that you are under targeted spiritual assault. The enemy conducts reconnaissance in the dream realm. He maps your fears, your unresolved wounds, your theological vulnerabilities, and he uses the architecture of your own subconscious to construct prisons that feel inescapable. The legs of lead are not a metaphor. They are a spiritual technology, a binding operation deployed against your forward momentum in the covenant. The narcissist in your life, the one whose behavior mirrors this dream with eerie precision, operates by the same mechanism. They study you. They learn the exact pressure points that will make you freeze. They deploy those points not in anger, but in calculation, with the controlled precision of someone who has decided that your advancement is a threat to their survival. Psychologically, this is the architecture of covert narcissistic warfare. They cannot stop you through direct confrontation because confrontation risks exposure, so they bind you. They create environments of low-grade chaos that keep your nervous system in a state of perpetual alert, draining the executive function you need to move forward. Spiritually, this binding has a legal dimension. The enemy requires an open door, a wound, an agreement, a point of access. The primitive memory that surfaces here is the moment you first believed you were not safe to move forward. The childhood instance when someone important to you rewarded your stillness and punished your momentum. The enemy has been exploiting that memory ever since, but here is the divine promotion hidden inside this persecution dream. The fact that you are being chased means you carry something worth pursuing. The fact that your legs are bound means you are standing at the threshold of a territory the enemy cannot afford to let you enter. The binding is the confirmation. The warfare is the credential. Every covenant carrier in Scripture faced a version of this dream, this paralysis, this herding toward apparent defeat. And every one of them, in the moment they stopped running and turned to face the pursuer with the authority of their grafted identity, found that the thing chasing them could not withstand the frequency of a believer who knows the route they are connected to. The smile is the weapon. You have seen it. You have felt the way something inside you recoils before your conscious mind can articulate why. The compliment arrives, perfectly constructed, linguistically indistinguishable from genuine admiration. You are so gifted. There is something so special about the way you carry yourself. I have never met anyone quite like you. The words are correct, but the smile does not reach the eyes. There is something behind the performance, a calculation, a cold assessment running parallel to the warmth being projected at you, and your body registers it even when your mind is still processing the flattery. This is the poisoned compliment, and it is one of the most sophisticated weapons in the arsenal of both the narcissistic personality and the spiritual adversary who animates them. The physical sensation is a curious mixture. On the surface, there is the warmth of being seen, the primitive human need for recognition momentarily satisfied. But underneath, in the chest and gut, there is a wrongness, a dissonance, as if your internal compass is reporting a direction while the surface scenery suggests another. The intrusive thought that follows is a self-betrayal. Maybe I am being paranoid, maybe I am projecting, maybe this person genuinely cares, and I am sabotaging a real connection because of my past wounds. That thought, that self-gaslighting, is the second half of the weapon. The first strike is the poisoned compliment itself. The second strike is the doubt it engineers in your capacity to accurately perceive threat. A person who cannot trust their own spiritual discernment is a person who will keep the door open to energy vampires indefinitely. Psychologically, the covert narcissist deploys the poisoned compliment as a positioning tool. They are not complimenting you, they are measuring you. They are establishing proximity under the cover of admiration so they can conduct a more thorough assessment of what you carry, what you are building, and what it would cost them for you to succeed. The spiritual dimension of this interaction is profound and disturbing. When someone approaches you with admiration that is actually envy wearing a mask, they carry with them a frequency of soul theft. Every interaction that is rooted in covert envy rather than genuine love is an attempt, whether conscious or not, to extract something from your spiritual atmosphere. The root memory that makes you vulnerable to this particular weapon is the memory of having been genuinely seen and celebrated, followed by betrayal. Someone who loved you once used their knowledge of you against you, and so your nervous system learned to treat visibility as danger and admiration as a potential threat. The enemy knows this. He sends the poisoned compliment because he knows you are hungry enough for genuine recognition that you will lower your discernment long enough for the extraction to happen. The divine promotion is this. Your ability to feel the dissonance between the smile and the eyes is not paranoia. It is prophetic discernment operating at the cellular level. The covenant you carry includes spiritual senses that were designed to protect you from exactly this kind of soul-level predation. Do not apologize for what you feel. Do not gaslight yourself into the prison of spiritual politeness. Trust what your body reports. The root of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is a root of covenant intelligence, and it runs through you. They do not want what you have. They want to be who you are. This distinction is everything, and missing it will cost you years of confused suffering in which you keep trying to protect your possessions when what you actually need to protect is your identity. The blatant copy is the third scene in the war being waged against you, and it operates with a cruelty that is almost beautiful in its precision. You notice it first in the small things. A phrase you coined appearing in their vocabulary, an aesthetic you developed showing up in their presentation, a vision you shared in confidence materializing in their public narrative with your fingerprints carefully removed. The physical sensation is a vertigo, a disorientation that makes you question your own timeline. Did you get this from them? Did you imagine that you had this first? The gaslighting embedded in this experience is architectural. The covert copyist, whether they are operating from narcissistic programming or from direct spiritual assignment against you, is banking on your inability to prove originality. They are betting that your sense of self is unstable enough that the confrontation with your own reflected image will destabilize rather than confirm you. What they are attempting, in the spiritual language of warfare, is an identity theft operation. Not of your material goods, not of your intellectual property in any legally actionable sense, but of the spiritual frequency you carry. When God assigns a person to a covenant role, He assigns them a unique resonance, a combination of gifting, personality, wound pattern, and calling that is unrepeatable. The enemy cannot create, he can only counterfeit. And the counterfeit operation he runs through the narcissistic personality in your life is designed to dilute your frequency by flooding your space with a cheaper imitation of your own signal. The intrusive thought at the height of this assault is corrosive. Maybe I'm not as original as I thought. Maybe this is just a pattern, and anyone could do what I do. Dishi. That thought is the spiritual equivalent of someone cutting your umbilical cord to the covenant and telling you the oxygen is just ambient air. The primitive memory activated here is the memory of being dismissed, of having something authentic in you minimized or replicated by someone who wanted the result of your anointing without the cost of your consecration. And the divine promotion that lives on the other side of this scene is magnificent. The copy confirms the original. Counterfeits only circulate when something real is worth imitating. No one manufactures a fake of something worthless. The spiritual tribunal verdict on the copyist is sobering. To steal another's frequency is to accumulate a spiritual debt that compounds with every replication. But for you, the chosen one being copied, the verdict is an acceleration. Every attempt to replicate you without the root of your covenant is a failed attempt, and every failure increases the gap between you and the imitation. You are not in competition with anyone. You are in possession of something that cannot be transferred without the covenant connection. Stand in that. The weight descends before you are fully awake. You are conscious enough to know you are in your bed, in your room, surrounded by the familiar geography of your waking life, but your body will not respond. Your chest is compressed from the inside, as if something has settled on your sternum with a deliberate heaviness, and the air in the room has thickened into a substance that resists the mechanical rhythm of your breath. This is sleep paralysis, and while the clinical literature will offer you explanations involving REM cycles and hypnagogic states, the person who has lived this more than once knows in the marrow of their bones that they were not alone in that room. As I teach heavily and deeply to those who arrive at the 3 keys to a prosperous life trilogy, I've already left the link for you in the pinned comment. This weight on your chest is just a symptom. The actual diagnosis is this. You are in a season of heightened spiritual sensitivity. Your discernment is developing faster than your defensive architecture, and the entities that have been operating in your atmosphere without resistance are responding to the shift with escalated pressure. The enemy does not escalate against people who pose no threat. The escalation of sleep paralysis experiences in your life is a spiritual stress response from the forces that have been feeding from your unprocessed trauma, your unguarded wounds, your unconscious agreements with orphan theology. They are increasing pressure because they feel the shift happening. They feel the root beginning to conduct its full voltage through you, and they are attempting, in that liminal space between sleep and waking, to reinstate the binding before you are conscious enough to use your authority against them. The psychological warfare dimension of this experience is the relationship between sleep deprivation and cognitive function. A person who is regularly visited by sleep paralysis is a person whose executive function is chronically impaired. Their capacity for strategic thinking, spiritual discernment, and emotional regulation is compromised in ways that make them maximally vulnerable to the gaslighting, manipulation, and identity erosion that the narcissistic personality in their life is deploying during waking hours. The body becomes the battlefield. The enemy runs a pincer operation, supernatural pressure in the night, interpersonal psychological warfare in the day, until the target is too exhausted to maintain the boundaries, declarations, and spiritual disciplines that would interrupt the cycle. The primitive memory that surfaces in the paralysis is pre-verbal. It is the memory of helplessness before a force larger than the self. The infant's experience of absolute dependency, weaponized and redeployed against the adult covenant carrier. But the divine promotion is this. The moment you speak in that paralysis, the moment you form the name of the covenant God in your throat and push it past the compression in your chest, the weight lifts. Not because of the volume of your voice, because of the frequency of the covenant name in the atmosphere of a room that has been invaded by forces that cannot tolerate that frequency. You are not powerless in the paralysis. You carry the key to your own release in the declaration of your grafted identity. The light bulb blows. The car refuses to start. The electronic device in your hand short-circuits at the precise moment when the argument in your home reaches its maximum frequency of contempt and rage. The burned-out light bulb is not superstition. It is physics applied to a domain that materialist science has not yet developed the instruments to measure. When the human body is under extreme emotional and spiritual stress, it generates an electromagnetic field disruption that interacts with the sensitive electronics and electrical systems in its immediate environment. But the spiritual dimension runs deeper than physics. What you are witnessing when the material world begins to respond to the spiritual warfare in your atmosphere is a leakage event. The oppression that has been building in your relational and spiritual environment has exceeded the container capacity of the invisible realm and is expressing itself in the visible one. The physical sensation in the moment of these material interferences is a recognition that lands in the gut like a stone. Something is wrong in a way that transcends the mechanical. The intrusive thought is either dismissive, "This is just coincidence, I am catastrophizing," or it is the opposite extreme, panicked and superstitious in a way that gives the enemy more credit than he deserves. Neither response serves you. The spiritually intelligent response is to treat material interference as a diagnostic instrument. What was happening in your spirit when the light blew? What conversation had just occurred? What agreement had been pushed on you? What declaration of orphan theology had been smuggled into your atmosphere, disguised as pastoral wisdom or friendly counsel? The narcissist in your life is, whether consciously or not, a conduit for a frequency of spiritual oppression that does not limit itself to the psychological dimension. Their contempt, their covert envy, their soul theft operations generate a resonance that affects the material world around you because the material world is downstream from the spiritual. The primitive memory activated here is the memory of living in an atmosphere of emotional volatility, of learning as a child to scan the environment for signs of incoming emotional weather, to read the room before the storm arrived. That hypervigilance, which served you then, has become a liability now because it keeps your nervous system in a state of chronic mobilization that accelerates the frequency disruption. The divine promotion embedded in the burned-out light bulb is that the material world is testifying to your significance. The forces arrayed against you are spending spiritual capital to suppress you, and that expenditure is itself evidence of the threat level you represent to the darkness. The covenant root you are connected to generates a frequency that cannot be contained by the enemy indefinitely. The material world will begin to reflect your liberation the moment you begin to declare it with the authority of a grafted heir who understands the tree they are drawing from. You walk into the room and the air changes, the conversation shifts, laughter becomes measured, eyes recalibrate, and even if nothing is said, even if everyone performs warmth with practiced fluency, you feel it. The silence in the room is not absence of sound. It is presence of something that does not belong in a room where covenant people should be thriving and safe. Envy has a specific atmospheric signature. It is colder than hatred, more patient than anger, and more dangerous than either because it wears the costume of admiration while conducting a full-spectrum suppression operation against the person it targets. The physical sensation is a contraction in the shoulders, a lifting of the defenses, a sudden tiredness that was not there before you entered the space. Your nervous system is reporting accurately. The room has become hostile, not through any overt act, but through the accumulated frequency of covert ill will being directed at you from behind smiling faces. The intrusive thought is a cruel one. Maybe I am the problem. Maybe my presence creates this discomfort because there is something wrong with me. This is exactly the thought the enemy needs you to land on, because it redirects the spiritual investigation away from the actual source of the heaviness and toward a self-flagellating spiral that keeps you in the room, trying to fix something that is not yours to fix. The psychological warfare being run here is the weaponization of your empathy. People with high spiritual sensitivity tend to absorb the atmospheric content of the rooms they enter. The narcissistic personalities who populate these rooms have learned, consciously or through patterned behavior, that your empathy can be turned into a liability by simply saturating your relational environment with negative frequency and then watching you carry it as if it were your own. The spiritual tribunal has a clear verdict on those who seed a room with envy. The law of covenant recoil states that what is sent against a covenant carrier without legal cause returns to the sender with interest. The primitive memory activated in these rooms is the memory of being the identified problem in a family system that could not tolerate your gifts. The child who was too bright, too intense, too much, too different, and who learned to make themselves smaller in order to survive the emotional climate of people who could not celebrate what they could not explain. The divine promotion is this: your discomfort in rooms filled with covert envy is not social anxiety. It is prophetic discernment. You are not required to make yourself comfortable in hostile atmospheres. You are required to discern them, name them in the spirit, and make a covenantal declaration that whatever has been sent against you in that room is hereby rejected, returned, and replaced with the frequency of the covenant that holds you. Leave when you need to leave. The root does not follow you into rooms that starve it. The unexpected betrayal does not arrive with warning. If it did, it would not qualify as betrayal. It comes from the person who slept in your tent, who knew your plans before they were plans, who received your hospitality with warmth and your vulnerability with apparent reverence. The Judas operating in your covenant circle is not always a malicious actor in the classic sense. Sometimes they are a wounded person who loves you genuinely until your advancement activates their unhealed lack. Sometimes they are a conscious operative who positioned themselves near you for exactly this purpose. The spiritual law at work in both cases is identical. What is carried into your atmosphere through broken covenant has the capacity to create a point of legal access for the enemy if you receive it without discernment. The physical sensation of betrayal is unlike any other pain. It is not the sharp, localized wound of outright attack. It is a systemic destabilization, as if the floor you were standing on has dissolved and you are briefly weightless in the worst possible way, suspended in a moment of incomprehension between who you thought this person was and what they have just revealed themselves to be. The intrusive thought is a weapon in its own right. If I could not see this coming, what else am I missing? Who else is not who they appear to be? This thought, if you let it run without a covenant framework to contain it, will build a prison of isolation around you that the enemy will celebrate as a secondary victory. He did not just get the betrayal, he got the isolation it produced. The psychological warfare dimension of Judas pattern betrayal is the exploitation of attachment. The narcissist, or the spiritually compromised person in your circle, understood that the depth of your loyalty and the generosity of your covenant love made you maximally vulnerable to this particular wound. They built the relationship to access the vulnerability. The spiritual tribunal views the breaking of covenant proximity with gravity that the natural mind cannot fully calculate. To receive someone's trust, to be given access to their spiritual interior, and to weaponize that access is not merely a relational failure, it is a violation of spiritual law that carries consequences that follow the perpetrator across dimensions. The primitive memory activated by this betrayal is the original wound of being failed by the first people who were supposed to keep you safe. The divine promotion is the part you must hold on to in the vertigo of discovery. The betrayal that was designed to destroy your momentum is the exact event that will ultimately accelerate it. Every Joseph who is betrayed by his brothers ends up in the palace. Every covenant carrier who survives the Judas kiss moves into a dimension of authority that would have been inaccessible without the suffering that the betrayal produced. The people who hurt you most severely were instruments of your promotion that neither you nor they could fully understand at the time. The dog knows before you do. You bring the new friend into the house, the colleague from work, the person from the congregation, the one who has been performing warmth with textbook precision, and the animal that has slept at your feet for years turns into a stranger. The barking is not territorial. The posture is not playful. Every animal instinct is online and reporting a single verdict: this person should not be here. The reacting animal is one of the most reliable diagnostic instruments available to the covenant carrier, who is learning to trust the intelligence the universe provides outside the narrow bandwidth of rational analysis. Animals operate without the cognitive machinery that the enemy has learned to hack. They cannot be gaslighted. They cannot be charmed by social performance. They receive the frequency of a person's actual spiritual state with an accuracy that bypasses every defense mechanism the predatory personality uses to maintain its mask. The physical sensation when you witness your animal's rejection of someone you've been trying to trust is a confirmation that lands in the body before it processes in the mind. Your gut clenches. There is a brief, almost imperceptible flash of relief, the relief of having a witness to something you have been talking yourself out of believing. The intrusive thought that follows is the enemy's last attempt to maintain the deception. Animals are just anxious. This does not mean anything. You cannot make relational decisions based on your dog's behavior. Notice what that thought is doing. It is asking you to dismiss empirical evidence in favor of the cognitive framework that the narcissist or the spiritually hostile person has been building in your mind to protect their access to you. Do not dismiss the animal. The psychological warfare operating here is the weaponization of your rationality. The narcissist has spent months or years training you to privilege their verbal explanations over your felt experience, to treat your instincts as symptoms of dysfunction, to root every perception through the analytical framework they have provided. The animal cannot be trained the same way. The animal's report is raw data from a sensory system that is not compromised by your desire to be loved, your history of abandonment, or your theological uncertainty about whether God would really protect you from people who claim to love him. The spiritual dimension is precise. Every person who approaches a covenant carrier with hidden malice carries a spiritual signature that exists below the range of conscious perception, but above the range of animal detection. The covenant root you are connected to is beginning to amplify your own frequency in ways that will eventually bring you to the same calibration as the animal at your feet. The divine promotion is the acceleration of discernment. Trust what the creature at your feet is telling you. The wisdom that was baked into creation before the fall is still operational. You look at the clock and it says 11:11. You glance at the total on your receipt and it is 33:30. True. You wake from a nightmare at 3:33 in the morning.